Has Tyler Herro already peaked as an NBA player? At least one ESPN analyst seems to think so. We break down what this means for Tyler and Miami on today's Locked On Heat.
You are Locked On Heat, your daily Miami Heat podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, welcome to Locked On Heat, your everyday podcast on the Miami Heat. Whether you're tuning in on YouTube, Odyssey, or your favorite podcast app, thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. I'm Wes Goldberg, editor at allyoucanheat.com, here with David Ramil. Both of us are credentialed Heat media members, and the best way to support the show is to leave a 5-star rating and review on your podcast app, and make sure to hit that subscribe button on YouTube. A reminder that now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. On a recent episode of Zach Lowe's podcast, Kevin Pelton raised an interesting question, David. He asked if Tyler Herro has already peaked. Okay, so we're going to get into some of the stats, try to answer that question, what it means for the Heat going forward on today's show. But let's first listen to the clip.
One of the questions you've asked, I believe, on the podcast is like, why is Terry Rozier here? And I think the reason is because Tyler Herro hasn't necessarily developed as a scorer the way that the Heat were expecting. His usage rate has gone down since he's been starting after winning the Sixth-Man Award 2 years ago, but his efficiency hasn't improved like you'd hope in that role. Did average a career high 4.8 assists per 36 minutes last season, so some playmaking improvement. And also just he's never played more than 67 games in a season. You know, you look at after that bubble run to the finals, people are thinking of him as a future all-star, maybe the next guy in sort of this Heat run.
What do you think, David? Has Tyler Herro peaked? Is Kevin Pelton right?
I think it's kind of reframing the same argument over and over again. Like the fact that he refers to certain statistics that might show a peak has been achieved is just the crux for the same argument. Like, and you boil it down to the simplistic terms that any Heat fan can come up with is like, well, Tyler can't get it done. We know who Tyler is. This is who he is. That's basically the assessment. But my feeling is that at 24, to say that this is the peak of what a player can achieve, given the context of this team, given the context of the injury and what it accomplished last year and taking him away while he was playing his best basketball, I just don't see how you can make that argument that a peak has been reached. Like, there's a very good chance that he would have exceeded his production from the previous season last year had he stayed healthy. Now, maybe that's part of the argument is that, well, Tyler's just never going to be healthy, so we'll never get to see a full sample size to indicate whether or not a peak has or hasn't been achieved. But it just seems like regurgitating the same argument and preference about Tyler, whether you hate Tyler or don't. And it seems like most people do at this point in time for whatever reason. It's not anything different than, well, Tyler just seems the same player. And you and I were talking about this before we recorded, so I think it's worth sharing here. Like, my feeling is that maybe there has been a plateau, which isn't the same as a peak. And maybe it's a semantic thing, and maybe if there's an English lit professor who wants to get on and kind of define it for us more clearly in their comments, I'd be welcome to hear it. But my feeling is that maybe there has been a plateau because he was relegated to the 6-man role. Then as a starter, there were some growing pains there. There has been injury. There has been integrating him into the lineup. There has been changes to the rotation, adding Kyle Lowry, adding Terry Rozier, doing things differently that aren't the same as saying, here are the keys to the car, run it the way that you think is best. And there's also the context clues of Jimmy Butler and playing alongside him and working together with him. So I think there's all this kind of context that maybe would indicate that Tyler has plateaued, that maybe there hasn't been that much growth, although I would argue personally that there has been some growth, but there hasn't been much growth. And that to me is a plateau. But I still think a peak of his best basketball is possible and available, and that we'll see it, if not this season, at some point in the future.
So I don't know that I want to do the semantics argument, but here we
Sure.
are. So the definition of plateau, according to a quick Google search, reach a state of little or no change after a time of activity or progress. So the idea with a plateau then, by the definition that I found on Google, is that Tyler Herro has reached this state where he is no longer going to change. He is who he is. That's what a plateau is. whereas a peak is to reach a highest point either of a specified value or at a specified time. So the idea with a peak is that it's kind of to me the same. It's that Tyler Herro has reached his highest point. We're just talking about
that's different. That's different
shapes.
though. No, I'm saying plateau is that maybe his production hasn't increased over the last few years, but that the inherent meaning that's boiled in there is that no peak is possible, that he will never get better than what he is. And my argument
with a plateau?
is that's that case. Yes, with a plateau.
I feel like if you're going to, I think like a plateau, maybe you can reach a higher peak at some point, but if you've reached your highest point, then how can you go higher? The definition of peak is to reach your highest point.
Right. He hasn't reached his highest point yet. That's the point.
And Kevin Pelton is saying he has. Kevin Pelton is saying he has reached his highest point.
That's right. He reached his highest point, the nadir of what he was, the zenith. I'm bringing out all the synonyms here of what he was following the bubble run. That's Pelton's argument, is that, there's the potential there for him to be an all-star, the six-man campaign.
Or no, well, he's saying that he's peaked at some point, whether it was after the bubble run or if it was last season. His argument is that his peak is in the past, and that's just who he is at this point. So I do think the argument of the acquisition of Terry Rozier signaled that Tyler Herro has peaked, plateaued, reached his zenith or nadir, or has hit his prime, or whatever expiration date. I don't know, but the idea that Terry Rozier signaled whatever that is, I don't think is completely accurate. That was more of, hey, we got this Kyle Lowry expiring contract. He's no good anymore. That was sort of more of Kyle Lowry's value hitting a nadir. How about that? And then and trying to move that for a value add in Terry Rozier, who plays the same position as Tyler Herro, but is a different kind of player than Tyler Herro. And when we talk about rim pressure and all the things that we talk about with Terry Rozier, that's not something that Herro brings to the table, although Herro brings a lot of other things to the table that Terry Rozier doesn't bring. That said, I don't know that it's a bad thing if Terry, like, I don't really care to argue whether or not Tyler Herro has peaked or if he can get better than what he is right now. I think he can, just for the record. But I don't find that all very interesting. Yeah, like you say, he's 24 years old. He's probably going to get marginally better. I guess the argument is like, what's the difference between marginally better and what Tyler Herro is now? Is there a higher level for him to ever reach in the sense of being like a number one or a number two option, which I just don't think is going to be the case. And in that respect, I agree. We have seen what Tyler Herro is going to be on a good team. There's ways he can get marginally better, turn the dial one way or the other, but he's never going to be the number one option on a championship contender. I don't think he'll ever be the number two option on a championship contender. My argument is that's fine. He's a 20-point per game scorer and an elite three-point shooter, a good rebounder at his position, has gotten a little bit better as a playmaker, as Kevin Pelton mentioned there, has gotten a little bit better as a team defender, even though he's clearly got physical limitations as a one-on-one defender that he's never going to overcome, and he's even talked about that publicly, Tyler Herro has. That's still a really good player. Like, we act like people, Heat fans that are like anti-Tyler Herro act like he's a bum and that he needs to be off the team, and now we can consider the contract and all these things, and there's an argument to be made that he's not worth $30 million. If you want to make that argument, fine. In the new CBA, you can argue that about basically every player in the NBA outside of like the top 7 guys. But the fact of the matter is, Tyler Herro is a very good basketball player. And if this is all he is forever, to me, the expectation the change has to come on the part of the fans and just adjusting their expectations of Tyler Herro and say, look, we got this guy. He's a 20-point per game scorer. There was a time after that bubble where we thought he was going to be the number one option potentially one day, or a number two option, or this all-star kind of guy. That's not going to happen, and that's okay. He's still a good basketball player, right? That's kind of where I'm at.
Yeah, I made the point before, and I know people will be critical of it. It's just I still think that there's a higher level for him to reach. And I think that he's capable of reaching it. And we can get into the nuances of what that looks like, but I still think there's a possibility of him to be a better scorer, like to continue to lean into, as you've said, you've made the argument that if there's one thing from Tyler that maybe could help him reach that kind of scoring boost that would make him be seen more favorably by fans and general punditry, I would say it's probably leaning into the 3-point shot and hitting those at a high rate.
I agree.
Not settling for the mid-range shot, not over dribbling and things like that. So there are certain tweaks there. My biggest concern, and I've made this point I don't know how many times now, is that we have not seen any growth from him in terms of getting contact and drawing fouls and getting to the line. And that, perhaps more than anything, really signifies the potential for a superstar leap there, or a star leap, whatever you want to call it or classify it as. He just needs to get to the line. He needs to absorb contact and be a little bit more physical in that sense and get to the line more. And that just hasn't happened over the course of his 5 years.
Well, I don't know if you've been looking at his Instagram page very much, David, but he's putting on muscle, and he is making that very clear. So that's sort of the theme of his Instagram over the summer. I cannot wait to see him on Media Day. Again, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is a guy who eats Chick-fil-A every day in order to put on muscle, and then treats himself to a milkshake a couple of times a week in order to put on weight.
No boxing videos, thank goodness. But
yeah, I guess not. But he shaved his head, so it's kind of like got that Rocky vibe where it's like, this is the new me. I'm in. I can't wait. Tyler Herro hears all of this stuff. He does. Whether or not that makes a difference, it motivates him, whatever. But he is motivated by sort of the perceived slights and the outside noise. He's made that very clear. There is one way, though, where Tyler Herro has made a noticeable improvement. I think it's been overlooked. It's exactly, though, what the Heat have wanted. We'll tell you what it is after this.
Today's episode is brought to you by BetterHelp. What's something you'd love to learn? Because I know I've neglected it in the past.
I want to know the difference between peak and plateau. That's what I want to learn.
You figured it out this show. The English language is broad and not going to be easily definable over the course of one therapy session or one podcast. But, I always wanted to learn how to play guitar to master it, really, because I can, kind of pluck a little bit at it. But that's not the same thing. It's so hard. You're an adult. You've got a job. You got a family. All these different things that demand your time. It's so hard to make time to learn new things because you kind of also lose that sense of curiosity. It's like, oh, you know what? I'm not as curious about it as I might have been if I was younger. Kids are always learning and growing, but as adults, sometimes that's a lot more difficult. But therapy can help you reconnect with your sense of wonder. And that's so huge for continuing to grow and develop as a person. Your back to school era can come at any age. So if you're thinking of starting therapy for whatever reason, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, really convenient. It's designed to be that way, flexible and suited to your schedule. And you just fill out a brief questionnaire. It takes a couple of minutes and you get matched with a licensed therapist right away. And if for whatever reason you need to switch therapists because your schedules change or perhaps you just aren't getting the kind of progress you'd like, you can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. So rediscover your curiosity with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA today and get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. We'll be right back.
Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen of the day. For your second listen, enjoy the Locked On NBA podcast. There's no offseason in the NBA, and Locked On NBA provides daily basketball analysis from national and local experts in 30 minutes or less. No one keeps you as informed or entertained as Locked On NBA. It's available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. David, what did you and Matt talk about on today's Locked On NBA?
We talked about the Minnesota Timberwolves because, the state of the Wolves and whether or not Rudy Gobert is less or more undervalued that Anthony Edwards has been overvalued over the course of the summer. But yeah, so it's a interesting
summer
conversation. I think Rudy is undervalued more than Ant has been overvalued. But that's a personal argument. I could see a lot of people feeling one way or the other about it.
Well, they can hear you guys make that argument on Locked On NBA today, available wherever you get your podcast and on YouTube. So the idea that Tyler Herro is plateaued, this is where I would push back against it. And you kind of alluded to this earlier. The context in which Tyler Herro has to play with the Miami Heat is I do wonder, what would it have been if Tyler Herro got drafted to the Pistons or some lousy team and just had all this room to grow, had just space on the court to roam and experiment and do all the things. I make this point all the time, but Giannis, I don't think becomes Giannis if the Bucks didn't stink his first couple of years, right? Where they were just and played him at point guard. People they're like, look, we stink. We have nothing to do. You're our point guard for a year. And he grew so much in that role. And I don't think he becomes the player he is today, if not for those couple of years. Tyler Herro never really got that. First year, he goes to the finals. He's on a team with Jimmy Butler, Bam Adebayo, coached by Eric Spoelstra, good players all around him, Andre Iguodala, Jay Crowder. And I think obviously that stuff helps him in different ways, but the Heat have always needed him to do a very specific thing, and I think that specific thing has changed over the years. I think as a rookie, even as a second-year player, it was, well, Bam Adebayo has the ball up at the three-point line. It's dribble handoffs. It's all that kind of stuff. Can you come off those screens, those dribble handoffs, shoot threes, come off the bench, be a microwave scorer for us? And then as the offense has changed over the years, and John Chablanca did a really good job writing about this for All You Can Heat, the site that I run, but as the offense has changed over the years into more like ISO-centric post-ups and kind of things like that, Tyler Herro has also had to do more of that. And Tyler Herro has also been asked, as the Heat have failed to trade him for Damian Lillard or Donovan Mitchell, to do sort of a primary ball handling kind of thing, and they've used him a lot more in pick and roll. And so I do think that the Heat need to nudge him more into a Klay Thompson type of role where he's more catch and shoot and all these things. And I do think that maybe the Terry Rozier acquisition signaled them wanting to do that. In fact, I know that that is the case. But for so much of his career, they have kind of been pushing him in that inefficient direction that Heat fans have a problem with him for being inefficient. You know what I mean? And it is partly his fault, no doubt. I'm not taking all the blame off of him. But the Heat and the whole coaching staff and Eric, they're not like beyond blame either, right? Like they have actually nudged him more in this direction. So with that being said, I pulled up these stats on Synergy, which is like this stat tracking site. They literally track every movement on the court using cameras and technology and blah, blah, blah. And they have they break down plays by play type. And Tyler Herro, when he's used as a pick and roll ball handler, 3 years, I got the last 3 years. So 3 years ago, 2021, 2022, he was scoring 0.88 points per possession as the pick and roll ball handler. That was in the 61st percentile in the NBA, so not very good. The next year, 0.93 points per pick and roll ball handler possession. Slightly better. 65th percentile, slightly better. Last year, Tyler Herro scored 0.96 points per pick and roll ball handler possession, which was in the 77th percentile in the NBA, which is good. It's above average, it's good, and it's a huge improvement from 3 years ago where he was in the 61st percentile. So he moves up 16 percentiles, I think is how percentiles work, within the matter of 3 years. And I think if you and I just said, okay, eye test, he has gotten better as a passer. He has gotten better as a pick and roll ball handler. And that's exactly the kind of growth the Heat have been looking for. That is, if you ask the Heat, if there was one way that Tyler Herro could have grown, I bet you they would have said that's the way we want him to grow because that's the kind of player we need in our offense. And Tyler Herro was clearly not that guy when he was drafted out of Kentucky, but they have kind of forced him into that hole. He's kind of a square peg in a round hole, and he's been making the most out of it.
So, yeah, I could see that being a strong case there. That if this is who the Heat envisioned, then he's continued to grow.
Not who they envisioned, who they needed him to be. I think they would have liked for him to be something else, but they didn't have any other options. What did they want?
That's the big question.
They wanted him to be Donovan Mitchell or Damian Lillard, but it's
and how like that's not even like they see that doesn't.
No, they literally wanted to trade him. They literally wanted to trade him for Donovan Mitchell or Damian Lillard. That's what I mean.
No, I get that, but I'm saying, like, how is that possible for Tyler to have become that? Like, those guys were such high usage players, regardless of the skill sets and the talent disparity and the physical disparity, whatever. Just it's so impossible for Tyler to have become that, given what his role is on this team. And so, if that's the expectation from either the front office or the fan base, then I don't know how to kind of rectify that in my brain. Because
I agree with you. But by the way, if he was capable of it, he would have gotten that usage rate. They would have moved the offense more towards him. They see all this stuff in practice and behind the scenes. If he were capable of being the number one option, he would have been the number one option. My argument is that he's not, and that's okay. Because how many players in the NBA are capable of being the number one option, right? You're holding them to such a high standard. Damian Lillard, that's a Hall of Famer. Donovan Mitchell, multi-time All-Star. That is such a high standard to hold a player to. And I think I understand after that bubble run maybe thinking that. But I think the last few years have shown that he's not going to be that.
You just look, I was looking just, as we were talking here, the 2019 draft. And Tyler has just been through such unique circumstances. There's the lockdown. there's the bubble, there's the shorter offseason than any player in NBA history has ever gone through, and the lack of opportunity for him to grow and develop. And, and it's been a difficult one, with the expectations being too high, perhaps, and also just the everything that's going on with his schedule and his ability to develop, just being at conflict with that injury, lack of time. There's so much involved here. It's just, I don't know. It has to be a reframing of what Tyler can be. And I this year, and we've made the case before, and maybe it doesn't mean anything, but I think he has to be able to prove something. Like this is his best opportunity. There cannot be any excuses. There was no injury over the offseason to recover from. There was no long playoff run that eats into your development time schedule or anything like that. This is just you at 24 and a half years old, entering what should be your physical and professional prime, and being able to live up to some level of heightened production. I don't know if it's as gaudy as maybe, all-star, 28 point per game score, etc. Those are different goals for different people. I'm sure he has even higher goals than that he'd like to achieve. But just in terms of how everything has been at conflict with his ability to continue to develop, I was just looking at through the draft, and there are a number of players that could fit into this category, with the exception of Ja Morant. And we're talking about somebody who could have arguably been one of the top picks in the draft that year, if not for Zion Williamson. He's progressed too, but there are people in New Orleans who are not happy with his progress. And I think you can make a strong case that maybe he's in the same kind of similar boat as Tyler in terms of not having lived up to the potential, which we all kind of have forgotten 5 years ago was over the moon about. So there's a lot to be said about that 2019 draft class and where Tyler fits into it. I think he's still one of the better players of the draft, and he has gone through different forms of adversity that have challenged his ability to continue to develop.
I will say, you know what? I got one other thing on this, and then I have some historical context, and we'll talk about whether or not if Tyler Herro has reached his peak, what it means for the Heat going forward. We're going to talk about all of that next, coming up here on Locked On Heat.
Today's episode, Locked On Heat, is brought to you FanDuel. Look, it's a weekend. Well, maybe not for Dolphins fans necessarily. They got their game on Thursday, but it's still a big NFL weekend. You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, and for good reason, because it's America's #1 sportsbook. Well, we've got something a little different for you to enjoy the NFL this weekend, because now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet just $5, just $5, and you get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon at a market game. And all you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. So just visit FanDuel.com and download America's #1 sportsbook today. We'll be right back.
Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. If you're new to us on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. You can also follow us on your favorite podcast app. I will say this. There are several excuses that we could throw Tyler Herro's way, and you and I get accused a lot of being Tyler Herro apologists, and that's fine. I'll wear that. It's okay.
I'm not. I was criticized for not being an apologist, or for kind of being a Herro hater, and yet here I am. I think there's context is so important, and I've made this case so long. Like the draft and talent evaluation and everything else like that, it's just an impossible thing to do. And if you're not drafted into the right situation, as you said, like a player can be stunted or can be pigeonholed in a certain way that it makes it look like they never reached their potential. Conversely, like you suggested, had he been drafted by Detroit and put up 29 points per game, who knows what the view would have been like of him around the league.
So
maybe he.
That said,
all
that stuff matters, right? Like you can't just say
sure.
There's other universes where Tyler Herro ends up being different, but this is the one where we live in, and this is the context that we're dealing with. And he did break his hand in the playoffs, and he did have the knee hyperextension and the foot injury last year, and that stuff can stunt a player's growth, right? All that context that we're talking about can absolutely stunt a player's growth in this universe. And yes, he's 24 years old. That's relatively young. But I don't see a lot of players. I think by now, 5-6 years into an NBA career, we typically know what a player is, right? Like you don't really see a player 5 or 6 years into their career dramatically change who it is that they are as a player. They could get worse, they can get marginally better, but we kind of know who they are, right? In terms of like the archetype and what it is that they are and certainly what their ceiling is going to be, right? Like, we know what it is. And so in that regard, I would say this about Tyler Herro is like, I think this is it. I think this is it. And there's definitely things that you could do to help him. And there's things that he can do to help himself. He needs to be more efficient. We've talked about that all the time. For as much as I get accused of being a Tyler Herro apologist, I'm the first one to say, too, be Klay Thompson, don't be CJ McCollum. He prefers to play like CJ McCollum and doesn't want to play like Klay Thompson. I will also say this, and I brought this up last year, after they traded for Terry Rozier, and then Tyler Herro got healthy, Tyler Herro embraced that off-ball catch-and-shoot stuff, and he talked openly about it in the locker room while I was there, and the Heat were trending in that direction, and then all the ball handlers fell down like bowling pins, and then he was the only one left, and then when he couldn't be the number one scoring option on a championship team against the defense that ultimately won the NBA title, people crushed him for it.
Right.
And it's not to say that he didn't, like, yeah, he failed, I guess, in like the black and white sense, but like the Heat were never going to win that series. Come on, what are we talking about? They were never going to beat the Celtics in the first round, no matter how Tyler Herro played, because they weren't going to shoot 70% from three-point range every single game. It wasn't going to happen. So all of that is there. My question is whether or not, if this is who Tyler Herro is it a disappointment? Here, Tyler Herro is a 13th pick in the 2019 draft. I went back, David. I looked at the 13th pick over the last several drafts. Here's the list. Since 2018, Jerome Robinson, not in the league. Tyler Herro in 2019. Kira Lewis Jr., either not in the league or barely in the league. Chris Duarte, barely in the league. Jalen Duren, fine, has not reached the same heights as Tyler Herro. Grady Dick, we'll see, but last year wasn't awesome
last
for him.
year's pick. Yeah.
And then Devin Carter, who is this year's pick, who's going to miss the start of the season because of shoulder surgery. You and I liked him a lot. We'll see what happens with him. But that's the list of guys who were picked recently with the 13th overall pick. And on that list, there is no question that Tyler Herro is the best 13th overall pick. And yet people act like he was on the cover of Sports Illustrated like LeBron James was, giving him like these crazy expectations. And I would say, based on 13th picks in recent history, Tyler Herro is a home run pick. But it's the expectations that are so out of whack with him.
Yes, agree with all of it. It's just, it's unbelievable how things have changed even dramatically. Like, the draft and the fact that players are getting, drafted at such a young age, and we can discount that if we like, and we've kind of just accepted it, right? As fans, as media. But the reality is that these players are still very young when they're getting into the league, and there is a lot of room for them to continue to grow and develop. I mean, you made the point about Giannis. Like, I mean, all that potential and physical tools and everything else, that doesn't matter a good goddamn if he's not drafted into a team that stinks and allows him the opportunity to be, you know what, we're not playing for anything.
Well, we don't. I will say that we don't know that for sure. I think that, but we don't know that for sure.
For the Milwaukee Bucks.
We don't know that Giannis wouldn't have become awesome. Like there's players who were just like LeBron would have been awesome no matter where you drafted him. Like Kevin Durant would have been awesome no matter where you drafted him. Like there are some players.
Maybe. I mean, maybe. Like, I mean, let's look at Carmelo Anthony, right? Like a player who's taken third championship and at the collegiate level after 1 year, goes in there. Like, how is his career viewed? Like, he's a great all-time elite scorer, but somehow still viewed as a disappointment because he just couldn't win at a high level. He didn't do enough to carry.
I mean, expectations are out of whack with all kinds of players, and we do view players through that prism of expectations. And I guess Carmelo Anthony, by virtue of where he was drafted, who his peers were, was kind of a disappointment. And I think that's a fair assessment based on how his career played out and the talent that he had. But in terms of Tyler Herro, if I can ask you one more question, if Tyler Herro has reached his peak, what do the Heat do about it?
I don't think they have anything they can do about it. Like, there's only so much. If this is the most blood you could possibly get from this particular stone, then it's kind of further minimizing his role in offense, hoping that you can max production he does put out there and kind of frame it in as nice a way as possible. And maybe somebody else will say, guess what? There is a peak to be had, and you're getting in on the ground floor now while you still can, because there is a higher level for him to reach, but he's just stagnated in our offense with our team and our current roster construction. And this is as far as he's going to go. And you hope that you can move him for a player of greater value that would be a better fit to this team. Otherwise, you're kind of stuck. And as cold as that's the reality of it. If nobody wants that contract, and that's why yesterday we made the case about acquiring Brandon Ingram, as many people were questioning, oh, why are you trading to trade Jimmy? Trade Tyler. Well, it kind of works both ways. They've got a Tyler on that roster already, and his name is CJ McCollum, as you said earlier. Like that is, and McCollum's probably a better version of Tyler. Although, again, he's older, he's had a lot more room to kind of run and kind of embrace that role. And I think it's just a very different scenario under which he's grown and been able to develop as a player. But they're not all that different, and they don't like Tyler Herro. So if they're going to make a trade for anybody, and you made the case that maybe a third team would have to be involved, the likelihood of any kind of deal being facilitated would have to include Brandon Ingram. That's neither here nor there, but at the same time, you got to look at what Tyler's value is. And you cannot put pennies on the dollar out there for an NBA trade to get a good player back. You can't trade him for a pack of chips either. You can't just trade him for nothing.
Right.
You're trying to get at least commensurate value, because otherwise you'll be flambeing Pat Riley forever because he gave up Tyler Herro, and who knows what will happen if he gets traded to another team. And maybe he'll eventually reach that peak that I think he's capable of. And if that's the case, then you look back and go, oh, you only got nothing for Tyler. Yeah. So it's an interesting point, and it's a very difficult spot that the front office is in right now, and they cannot just trade him for nothing. But at the same time, no team that has a superstar that they're willing to trade is willing to make that deal with Tyler Herro as the base of that trade deal.
So if Tyler Herro has peaked, then the Heat need to evaluate what he means to the team, and in a lot of different ways, right? Like, yeah, do you change his role? I think the Heat are already, by the way, going down that path. I think that the Terry Rozier acquisition did signal a change in the backcourt sort of roles. I think everybody's job description changed a little bit when Terry Rozier entered the roster, just because he's such a different player than Kyle Lowry was.
Sure.
So everybody has to adjust, just like, and this is not unique to Tyler Herro. Everybody has to adjust. Bam had to do it. Jimmy had to do it. Like, you just have to adjust when your roster changes. So there's a little bit of that. I also think they need to reevaluate what Tyler Herro means to the organization and his value to the organization, all these things. It's been no secret that they've been trying to trade Tyler Herro for a top 75 all-time-ish player, an all-NBA caliber type of guy, in other words.
Right.
Okay. Do they have to adjust that to something a little bit down, to somebody who's capable of making an all-star team? Maybe they just have to adjust it to a guy who plays a different position if they need to kind of redistribute resources on this roster. Because I think if you make the argument that Tyler Herro has peaked, you could also make the argument that the Miami Heat overall have peaked, because they have been really reliant on either Tyler Herro or basically Tyler Herro's cap slot to take this team up the next level. Whether or not that cap slot turned into Damian Lillard, or that cap slot turned into Donovan Mitchell or Kevin Durant or whoever it was, they have been like Tyler Herro's cap slot has been the one thing that this front office has been looking at and saying, that's what can get us over the top. And if it's not trading Tyler Herro for an all-NBA caliber player who can get us to that next level, then it's hopefully Tyler Herro becoming a better player who could take us over the top. And like I already said, they've been throwing him into pick and rolls, trying to force him into that growth that just has not come, because he's frankly playing out of position in that role. And so if Tyler Herro's peaked, that means the Miami Heat have peaked. And if that's the case, then as an organization, you have to think about what it is that's next for us. And maybe that's, okay, well, Jimmy Butler's going to be older here, and maybe we don't feel great about re-signing him next summer. And if that's the case, and maybe we also trade Tyler Herro. Maybe you just take all the little pieces that have peaked and say, well, we can't peak. We can't be on the treadmill of mediocrity. We can't be running in place. We've got everything that has peaked here or is declining because of age or whatever. We got to throw those things overboard and take all the things that are growing forward, like Bam, Jaime Jaquez, Nikola Jovic, Khalil Ware, like all the young players, all these things, and say, that's what's going to push us forward. So I don't know. Easier said than done, obviously. I'm looking at this in a very binary type of way, and I understand that. But yeah, if Tyler Herro has peaked, the Miami Heat have peaked. And that's what that means, right now at least, unless they can turn that cap slot into something else.
Well, there's also the expectation that Terry is going to provide a boost that didn't exist the previous 3 seasons with Kyle Lowry on the roster. So I mean, I don't know that the peak is necessarily, the team's peak is necessarily tied to the individual's peak, but I see your overall point. I just also think that if you're looking at it from the perspective of like, maybe Tyler has reached his individual peak and you're probably going to need to make some change, again, I'm trying to think like what's a position that you would need to fill then? Would it be the small forward position because you think Jimmy is leaving? Probably not, because you've got Jaime Jaquez on the roster. So is it the power forward spot to get more of a traditional four than Niko Jovic? Maybe. What does that mean?
Maybe,
Kyle Kuzma?
Maybe it's a different.
Right.
Maybe it's a different guard. Maybe it's just a guard who plays a little bit different. I don't know. That's
more
that's
of
a whole
floor
other
general
conversation.
type.
No, I don't know. Maybe unless you think Terry Rozier is a floor general, and or I don't know.
You do not.
That's sort of the point of this season. I think is figuring all of that out. As much, and I say this all the time, but like this roster, this core has been together for 6 years now, and we're still sort of figuring out what it does.
Right.
Which is really interesting and kind of unfortunate at the same time. But I think the season is about kind of figuring that kind of stuff. Is Nikola Jovic your long-term four? Do you think he's plays a different position? Do you think he's a bench guy? Like, I don't know. But they got a lot of things to figure out with this team.
We'll be there to cover all of them.
Yeah,
we'll be there to cover all of them. Yeah, that's it. All the changes. We'll be there.
Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Like, comment, and subscribe on YouTube. Follow us on your favorite podcast app.